Hey everyone, welcome back to Launch Control's ongoing series of educational webinars. Today, I'm really excited about this topic. We're going to focus on novations, and we're going to be led today by Christian Weatherspoon and Chris Deal from REI Made Easy. How you doing? How you doing, fellas?
Fantastic,
Great.
man. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for
Well,
having us.
yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys. Novations is, full transparency. It's something I know nothing about. So I'm really excited to get kind of into the intricacies. So, I can help the subscriber base learn more about this, push people back to this webinar to learn more about it, work with you guys. But it's a topic that, I've seen on a lot of the really big ticket masterminds that not everyone has access to. Right. And so I wanted to open this one up to the whole launch subscriber base, no matter where they're at in the process of their business. And you guys, we've known each other for years. You're great coaches, you're great partners to work with for people that are on their way up. So super excited to have you here. As I just said, I know absolutely nothing about this. So I'm gonna hand the keys over to you, let you guys run, just tag me in if you need anything, but I got my pad and paper ready. So take it away, boys.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Sounds good. And are people going to have the ability to post questions in a chat or as
Yeah,
well?
so
Okay.
the Q&A box is open. If anybody wants to pop questions in there or in the chat, either one is fine. I'll be monitoring things as we go along. We'll save Q&A for the end. We want to have a really kind of robust Q&A at the end of this one and have the guys here be able to answer all of your questions, but populate them along the way, and then we'll track them and get to them when we get to the Q&A section.
Awesome. Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to kick this off and go just as if you received the email or you saw the breakdown of what we're going to cover. Well, that's exactly what we're going to cover, and we're going to do it pretty much in that order. So we're just going to talk about, when we say the official title of this, like recession proofing or future proofing your business with novations, we're not lying. It's not hype. So you'll hear all about that. And we're going to start with like, well, why is a novation so powerful, right? And just go through a case study. We'll have a couple case studies here. And then, as they come up, I would suggest you write those questions down and then pop them in all at the end so that we can address every single one of them. But the first thing to consider is like, well, asking the question, what the heck is a novation? And the novation, just to put it succinctly, is to replace, and it's a law term, it's a legal term to replace a contract. We do something a little bit unique where every single one of our contracts technically have a novation clause in there, so we're not having to go back and get different documents signed, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But that's the way that I would define it. But Chris, he's on the phone. He's the actual guy who's there talking to sellers about this opportunity. So that's why I absolutely have to have him on because he's in the trenches of this as well. So, Chris, from your perspective, to put it succinctly, what is innovation? Why is it so powerful versus a wholesale deal?
Yeah, great question. So, and by the way, somebody mentioned that your volume is a little bit lower. I don't know if I can hear you fine on my end. Kevin, let me know if you can hear me well as well or not. But yeah, so what is innovation? Like, why is it so powerful? So as Christian mentioned, novation, the legal term, the definition, novate just simply means to replace one contract with another contract, right? Now, what is the relevance when it comes to cash wholesaling? And, by a show of hands or thumbs up or, put a 1 in the chat if your guys' primary strategy is just cash wholesaling, or if that's a big part of your business. Okay. That was a big part of our business. And Mehmet, yes, you can use it for land deals. It would be a little bit different, but we can dive into that. But basically, cash wholesaling, right? And I want to compare it to cash wholesaling because I think that'll help you guys just have a little bit of a baseline, right? So a cash wholesale deal is you enter into a contract to purchase a property, and that agreement is to purchase it with cash. Now, we say cash, really what I like to define it as is a non-lender contingent offer to buy, right? And why do I say that? Because more often than not, buyers are using hard money, private money. So it's not really cash. They're getting a loan to buy the property, but it's not a lender contingent offer. Okay. So that distinction I think is really, really important when you start talking about novations, because when you go the retail market and you are accepting conventional FHA, VA offers, USDA offers, these are what I would refer to as lender contingent offers, right? So the lender specifically has their own contingencies in place that if they don't meet certain qualifications, they're going to kill the deal. Whereas like hard money, pure cash, private money, you generally don't have those things. So creating that distinction, I think, is really important when you start going into novations, because a novation gives you the ability to enter into a cash or a non-lender contingent purchase agreement with a seller, and then replace that agreement with a offer from a buyer that is going to come in with a traditional loan, like a conventional loan, FHA, VA, or USDA. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. And Matthew put one. That's his main strategy as well. Pick
And
this back.
South Carolina is his main market, which is, I'm sure that's interesting for him right now.
I'm sure. Pick this back up, Chris, but I'll just put it in the bullet points that like we talked about because there's so much to talk about and so many ways to explain this. But we literally had to write down and then like just bullet point it to be concise. It gives you the ability out of three. Okay, number one, it gives you the ability to offer more and make more. And we'll show you that with
Mhm.
case studies. So you can provide a higher offer to the seller and also make more. Number two, you can monetize deals that otherwise would not be cash deals. So for y'all who are wholesaling out there, right? You need it to be a cash deal in order to actually make money. So what are you doing? Effectively, you're getting more out of the leads that you are paying to generate, right? Using launch control text message marketing. And then number three, you make more money with properties that actually aren't even fixers. So in short, you can monetize 80% of the leads where otherwise people would be wasting those dollars on marketing and not also being able to serve the sellers. So
Exactly.
take it from there, brother.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reality is, right, like the business as a wholesaler is churning through a ton of leads that don't make sense for a cash deal, right? Like that's the reality, right? When you boil it down, sure, we're trying to find the cash deal, but what do we have to do to get there? We're sifting wheat, right? So we're digging through all of these leads that are not fixers, might not have significant distress and significant motivation, but many of them have expressed interest. They've raised their hand, right? When you're texting them through launch control, they say, you know what? Glad you asked. I actually am considering selling my house. And then you talk to them and they're like, no, I mean, it's livable. It's dated. Sure, it could be updated to 2024 standards, but everything works. All the mechanicals work. The roof is fine. The foundation's fine. There's no fire damage. We live in it. We got a loan on it 5 years ago, right? Like everything's good, right? Um, those leads, you're just throwing those away. And so this is an opportunity for you to take those leads and monetize those at a really, really high level. And in a lot of cases, make more money on those leads, each of those leads, than you would on any of your cash wholesale deals.
Yeah. Consider the rural markets too. That's something I didn't specify, but when I talk about monetizing deals that wouldn't be cash, maybe the property does need work and maybe you're actually able to see there's a small wholesale profit, but if you don't have a buyer to buy it, well then there's no wholesale profit. And by buyer I mean a flipper, right? So you can
Exactly.
broaden your buyer base in rural markets. In fact, one of the case studies we're going to share with you is in a rural market that I am relatively confident everybody who sees that as an investor in a larger MSA would look at that and say, I'm not going to waste my time, but we made around 40 grand. So it wasn't a waste of time, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Um,
Awesome. Yeah, so this is kind of where, unless there was something else you wanted to add, Chris, about why it's so powerful, and we've obviously defined it, kind of following suit is the Novation Agreements Explained, where we give a little general overview of the contract itself, and we talk
yeah.
about what the verbiage means.
Yeah, and before we get into that, right? Like I want to touch on one deal that I think is really really powerful for helping. So if you guys are watching this and you're like, I'm not sure if this novation strategy is for me, let me just tell you about this one deal that we did here in San Diego, that will totally change your view of novations and why you should add this to your tool belt, right? Like if you're a golfer, right? I don't know how many of you guys are golfers, right? Would you ever go to play a game of golf with simply a driver? Would that be the only golf club in your bag? If it is, then you're going to go Happy Gilmore all day and, maybe you succeed. But the reality is you're probably going to have a wedge, a putter. You're going to have all these other things, right? And a Novation is just another club in the bag. And so this deal on Terrywood Ave in San Diego, it's actually in Santee. So we pitched this seller, and in order for us to possibly make $5,000 on this, we would have had to offer the seller $580,000 or $585,000, right? The property was completely livable, financeable, everything was good. The problem was there's no world that he would have accepted $580,000 or 500, even 500, not even $600,000. He wouldn't have accepted that, right? So, but let's just say he would have accepted it and we would have gotten it locked up as a cash deal. We would have pitched it out there, and every single one of the flippers there would have been like, well, there's really no margin on this. Like, I might be able to give you $5,000 for it, right? And we'd spend a lot of time, energy, and effort. And so let's say we did get that across the finish line as a cash wholesale deal. Great. The time, energy, and effort amounted us $5,000, which for many of you could be a really decent deal, right? Like that could be a game changer, especially if this is just like a side hustle for you, right? Um, on the flip side, we were actually able, by leveraging a novation agreement, we were able to offer the seller 10% more, which doesn't sound like a lot, but on a $585,000 normal offer times 1.1, that's $643,000. The offer we ended up giving him with the novation was 645, which he agreed to. And then we were able to list it. We just did minor cleanup, right? He was already packing and we just staged it, moved some things around, got some photos, got our agent on it, and we made 10 times the profit. Our total profit on that deal was $45,000. So you might be thinking like, wait, how can you give a seller more money, but then also profit more money? Like that doesn't even, like, mathematically, how does that make sense, right? And the reality is because it comes down to the buyer. What is the buyer? Like the reason why the buyer is purchasing that property, right? A flipper, they're buying that property not because they love contracting and they love like, oh, I like to update kitchens and that's what I do as a hobby, right? Like that's not their MO, right? Like their goal is underwrite the deal, buy it cash as low as they possibly can, invest money into renovating it and sell it at the top of the market and make profit. But a retail buyer is buying a property so they could see little Timmy and Susie grow up in the household. Where are we going to eat dinner together? Where are we going to pray together? Where are we going to watch TV together? Where are we going to have our Saturday, brunch, and talk about the school week, right? That's what they're looking for. So they're going to pay higher than a fix and flipper. And so in this scenario, we listed the property for 729. We ended up getting a buyer at I think 725, just shy of our asking. And then, with a novation, we give the seller the net number of that 645, and then the gap between the 725 and 645, that's ours. And then we pay the realtor commissions, closing costs, and concessions out of that. And so we handled all of that stuff, and that's what left us with a $45,000 or $46,000 total profit on that deal that otherwise would have been a canceled contract if we, wouldn't even have been a contract because he wouldn't have accepted the 585.
Not only that, I don't know many investors who would look at a $5,000 deal for wholesaling it, even if they were able to overcome objection after objection from the 645 that the seller of Terrywood accepted to 580, 65 grand ostensibly less. I don't know anybody who would do that deal,
Yeah.
right? Notwithstanding the repair numbers, everybody, because we all know if you've ever flipped a property before, how many things can go wrong, change orders in the process of a renovation project. So that's a
Yep.
lot of risk that can be sucked up real quick, not just from the perspective of I'm a wholesaler, so I'm going to put on my rehabber hat because that's how to be the best wholesaler. But
Exactly.
the person who's going to buy that, I don't know any rehabber who's going to be like, well, this margin is kind of thin. That would
Yeah.
still be a thin deal for them. So yeah,
Cool. So hopefully that kind of, shows you guys the power of like why to add Novations to your tool belt and how it's going to change your profit margins pretty dramatically. So let's go into the next section of Novation agreements explained, Christian.
yeah. So general overview of what it really is and the language in the contract. I'll just again concisely. I had to write this down because we could talk about it, but we have a time crunch here. So really, it's this: the Novation agreement. It's what we use is essentially the same document for everything. I told you we would get to this part, and what we've included is a clause. Basically, cash. Everybody knows cash, right? So it's simply an agreement to purchase with a predetermined amount of time and an inspection period, an EMD. What we then do is we include what's called an attorney in fact or a limited power of attorney that gives the ability for us to sign listing docs on behalf of the seller. And we'll talk about how we can position that, whether it's a full novation or B pre-marketing novation, which a lot of how I've explained this to other people who I've talked about coming to this webinar was if you have heard of novations, you don't know it like this. And that's actually kind of what Chris charted this uncharted territory about when it comes to pre-marketing novations, which is kind of his coined term. As far as I know, I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. So we will kind of dive into that a little bit later. The third,
But by the
yeah, go ahead.
way, one other form of novation that we don't really do, that I think, the umbrella of novations basically is just transactions where you have a cash agreement, you're replacing it with a lender contingent agreement. Now, the types of novations are, you have wholesale novations, which is what we focus on, right? These are properties that don't really need a substantial amount of work, maybe a little bit of light cleaning, maybe paint, maybe cleanup, some concessions. Then you have full fix and flip novations.
Right,
We don't do those. We don't really recommend those.
right.
There's a significant amount of risk. So, and we'll talk more about that later. And then what, as Christian mentioned, what we have coined as pre-marketing novations. We'll talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, when we get to the do's and don'ts, we'll share best practices. And again, this is our opinion as far as the strategy is concerned. This is not just opinion. It obviously works really well. So the third piece to this is a novation indemnification agreement. This is part of the contract language, right? Where it's just going to provide a set of instructions for escrow on how to perform the transaction in the event that we choose with our specialized contracts to not assign it to a cash buyer, but instead choose to novate it to a buyer with a loan. So it's going to explain to escrow that the seller is still entitled to the number that we agreed to in the cash section of our contract. So again, this is one contract that we use that gives us the ability to be flexible, and we'll have another case study where we're going to show you and share the information with you where we did just get a traditional cash purchase agreement signed with our novation clause with the intention of assigning this deal to a rehab buyer, but instead decided we pivoted to a novation and got it listed and sold it to a retail buyer. So those are really, that's kind of the legal stuff without getting into line by line of the contract, which we do in our mastermind, which we do on one-on-one basis. So
Yep.
additionally, the only thing that I mentioned is what we also do now is we put a lien on the property instead of recording a memorandum, right?
Yep.
So we can
Yeah.
again more about that later. But
Yeah.
there's
And by the way, in the chat, if you guys have already done a novation in the past, just put a 1 in the chat. I'm curious how many of you guys have actually done a novation. And if you have never done a novation, but you're interested, put a 2 in the chat. Awesome.
Matthew's done it.
Matthew's done a novation. Great. Awesome.
Two, never done
Mehmet
one.
has not. Awesome. Okay. All right. Cool. So we have, a couple people on both sides. So this is great. And so, for those of you who have already done novations, the great thing about this is, you might already know everything that we're going to talk about. There's a lot of times where I jump on Zooms and I watch some trainings and it's like, yeah, I knew most of that, but I took one little nugget and it was something that added to the arsenal that was huge for our business, and one of those things is what Christian actually just mentioned, which is recording a lien against the property as opposed to simply doing a memorandum of purchase and sale agreement. And that is such a powerful tool. And, we talk about it in our mastermind, and we might touch on it a little bit here as well. But yeah, Christian, what's the next section we're going to discuss?
Yeah, well, what we want to talk now is really how to make money with a real estate novation, kind of the two main ways that we novate a property, which you hinted towards, that pre-marketing versus full novation,
Mhm.
notwithstanding just the numbers on, I believe it's Highway T, that the case study that we're going to talk
Yeah.
about, because that was just, I mean, it still would have been a decent wholesale as opposed to a novation, but the numbers came in for us at a novation
Yeah.
to provide more.
Yeah. So basically, our and this is not going to be everybody's business model, right? Like if you guys are focusing on cash wholesale deals, you might just simply focus there. And then what we do is we offer dispo support and where we'll JV with you. If you have a cash wholesale deal that's not going to make sense as a cash wholesale deal and you need it to be converted to a novation, our team can actually help you take that contract, convert it into a novation. We'll then vet the agents, go through the whole process, transaction coordinate the whole deal, get it all the way across the finish line. And in many cases, we can actually foot the bill for any of the things that the lender requires to be done. Like, for example, we did a deal in Joshua Tree where we had to replace the roof and we had to replace the septic tank. It was like $30,000 worth of renovations. Most wholesalers don't have that in their bank account. We do, and we were able to take that across the finish line, get those things done, because otherwise the lender was going to kill that deal. So you can bring those deals to us. We can help you get them across the finish line and get paid on those. But basically, the big difference, how we make money on novations, is either full novations or pre-marketing novations. So in our business, we use the same contracts, right? Whether it's a cash wholesale deal or a novation, right? I'll repeat that. We use the exact same contracts, whether it's a cash wholesale deal or a novation, meaning we get a cash purchase agreement, we get the attorney in fact signed, and we also get a novation and indemnification agreement. Just because I have that contract structured that way does not make it a novation. All it does is gives me the flexibility. With a cash purchase agreement, I only can assign that cash purchase agreement to a non-lender contingent buyer, right? But by having the other two things, the attorney in fact allows me to list it, and the novation indemnification agreement gives me the ability to novate it to a buyer with a loan. So it just adds an extra exit strategy if needed, right? So we always use the same contracts on every single deal. So on this particular deal, Highway T, we entered into the contract and the discussions based on a cash wholesale deal. And it's in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, which has a population of like 16,000 people. So it's not the tiniest town we've ever done a deal in, but it's certainly not a major city by any means, right? So we could have wholesaled that. But after, further review, after getting it under contract, and he accepted our cash number, we then discovered, okay, this is in, pretty decent shape and we could actually list this thing. So we got it under contract for $57,000. We then listed it with an agent after talking to some agents in the area for $129,000. And after the negotiations with the buyer, concessions, closing costs, everything else, we ended up netting a little over $40,000 on that deal. Whereas if it was simply a cash wholesale deal, it probably would have been a 5 to maybe 10 grand deal just by virtue of the fact that it was a pretty rural area. There's not going to be a lot of flippers out there. And so this one made a whole lot of sense. Now, how do we present that, right? So what we call a full novation is when we anchor low with a cash offer, and we basically give a cash offer and we tell the seller, like, and they want too much, like, there's no way that we can buy this house, right? There's no way that we can do this deal as a cash deal. So we pull the rug out from under them. We can't move forward with this purchase. We cannot buy your home. We're not the buyer. However, we might know your buyer, right? The fact that we've been doing business since 2008 nationwide, we have a massive list of investors all over the country that do business for a whole host of different reasons. You have Airbnbs, you have traveling nurse rentals, you have, sober living, transitional housing, all different strategies that buyers use. And we also have retail buyers, and we can actually, if your property qualifies, we can put it through this program, right? And so that's the full Novation pitch, right? We're telling them we're not the buyer and that we're going to market it out to our list of buyers. Some of them are investors, some of them are retail buyers.
Do the cash number that's too low first, just to be perfectly
Correct. Yeah, right. Exactly. They've said no to our cash offer. We can't go any higher there. But then we re-underwrite the deal from a Novation and go that route. Now, a pre-marketing Novation is we've gone through the process of offering cash and we were able to negotiate and get them to accept our cash offer, right? Then when we go through the contract, we have a pre-marketing clause in our agreement that basically allows us to market the property while we're in escrow. So we lean heavy on that language, and we talk to them about, hey, one of the ways that allows us to come up to the number that you're looking for is by cutting costs. And one way to do that is by cutting time. And the way we cut time of our process is by pre-marketing the property, kind of like a coming soon while we're in escrow. And so we'll talk about that as we go through our agreement. And so again, we presented a cash purchase and then pre-marketed the property, and then we ended up finding a new buyer. And if, and there's ways to overcome objections if they're like, well, it sounds like you're just going to sell my property, right? Like you'll get those, you're going to list my property on the MLS. You'll sometimes get those types of objections, but there's ways to overcome that very easily. You can talk about buyers being able to pick out their fits and finishes. Like there's a story of a deal where it was a retail sale, new carpets all throughout. It was like $12,000 a new carpet. The day after closing, what'd the buyer do? The buyer replaced all the carpet with LVP, right? So it's like both people spent $12,000 to $15,000. It's like 30 grand of just wasted money, right? And chances are that buyer's offer came in a little bit lower because they were anticipating replacing the carpet, right? So, you present that to the seller. Yeah, this gives us the ability to pre-market it and allow buyers to customize options through the fix and flip, through the renovations, and pick out their paint colors and their cabinet colors and all those different things, right? So there's ways to overcome those objections, but ultimately we're either pre-marketing or we're not the buyer and we're going to go full Novation.
awesome. How many of you guys thought that was really awesome? Just put a 1. Put a 1 in the chat. And I'll tell you, I've been to coach real estate investors for a long time. And I mean, I know my stuff and then in my lane. And then I taught Chris real estate investing. And then he went off and said, you know what, there's other ways to do this. I'm hearing this stuff. So he starts learning about the Novation and then he shares it with me. And I'm like, dude, this is awesome, especially as the market's shifting. And then he says, you know what, maybe we can do it a little bit differently for the kind of in between. And then he says, we'll do a pre-marketing Novation. So that, to me, I was putting a 1 in the chat in our private conversation when he was sharing that idea with me. So,
guys, I was going to say this for the Q&A, but, I'll jump in here and say, like, I think that this is tremendous because of the level of transparency between investor and seller, which is where, we've talked about this independently of the industry really trending that way, of sellers being much more aware of the investor market, much more aware of their options and opportunities within that market, and transparency being key to just creating a good seller-investor relationship and a scalable one for all of us. So I love the openness of this. I love the interactiveness with the seller and letting them kind of control their own destiny a bit by really participating in the outcome. I think it's fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does help communication, and that's the thing is like with cash wholesale deals. I mean, how many people in here, just put a 0 in the chat if you've in your cash wholesale deal, you've had to like play this dance of like, well, I am the buyer, and then like you're getting a guy in who's going to walk through, and it's like, oh, he's my contractor, but he's really the buyer, and then you have an agent who's bringing a buyer. You got to have the conversation with the agent. It's like, hey, look, you're the agent, but like these are just contractors coming in, and they're all on our team, and blah 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 and all that stuff, right? And then going for the reduction, right? Like that dance is like it can be draining mentally trying to go through that whole dog and pony show.
Yeah. You'll have two left feet if you're trying to dance to that beat because it is very, very difficult. And don't, I'm not saying we haven't done it because we've done it too. You know what I mean? So, we have a couple questions. And by the way, we'll get to that, Kevin, shortly as well, just as a recap. But for the interest of time, kind of moving on from that particular case study and the contract language and how you position this when you're on the phone with the seller. Chris, I think you did a great job doing that. I mean, you do it all the time. So it's like the old hat, so to speak. You also kind of gave a preview about this. So as we move on to like the do's and don'ts of real estate novations and best practices. And, opening up this part of the conversation, I'll just tell you, Chris said we're not doing full gut or full rehabs or really extensive work to a property while we're in escrow, not owning it. And, Chris, you could speak to that as well. I know some
Yeah.
people who say that, who teach that, and I'm not going to say that they're wrong because they're not. But our risk threshold is we do not want to start doing a bunch of work on a property that we do not own, and then something can happen where, because it's happened before, buyers leave, sellers ghost, all that, and then we're out all the money that we put into the project.
Yeah. Or, I mean, one example, right? Like how many people, like my wife, for example, awesome, right? What she's not awesome at is being able to look at a distressed house and visualize what that house could look like. That's just not in her wheelhouse. She doesn't have that creativity. She's a creative person, but she can't look at a distressed house and see like, oh yeah, you could like move this wall, you could do this cabinets, these. She has no vision for that, right? I can see past, the hoarder house, all that stuff, and visualize, okay, what can we do here? How can we update this, change it, and make it a really, really nice house, right? Now, how many sellers are in that same position? So you do fix and flip novations, you don't own it. All of a sudden you renovate this house and now the seller's like, wow, I really like my house now. Maybe I don't want to sell. And they decide they're not going to sell. Well, at that point, what is the recourse? Now, I haven't gone down this rabbit trail enough to know whether there's other things, other mechanisms that you could put in place to protect yourself. But as far as I know, and my understanding of it is all you will have is a recordable lien against the property. So if you put $60,000 worth of renovations into that property and they're like, I like my house now, I'm going to stay, you can sue them possibly, and you can record a lien. But if they stay there for the next 20 years, when are you going to get paid out on that lien? Well, in 20 years when they sell the house, right? So that's a challenge. Now, there's other ways that you can structure a deal creatively, and we're not going to get into that, but creative finance, executory contracts, all types of other things, which we've done. To make it so that you now own the home and then you do the renovation, that's a different conversation because now you're evicting a tenant as opposed to putting a lien on a house that somebody owns and no longer wants to sell. So our don'ts for novations is we don't do fix and flip novations that we don't own the property. That's just a hard pass for us. That may change in the future, but as of right now, that's not something that we're doing. Best practices, I would say really making ideally, like the ideal novation is a property that is livable and more specifically financeable. Can it qualify? Like the best barrier for entry is, could it qualify for FHA financing? FHA and VA financing are going to have the more strict inspection contingencies. So if it can qualify for either of those, then it can qualify for any financing, and that just opens up your buyer pool pretty significantly so that you can, you know, novate the property effectively. The other thing is, you want, like, in a perfect world, the mechanicals will be working and in good order and not need to be replaced. And what do I mean by mechanicals? Like HVAC, you know, forced heat, plumbing, electrical, that stuff's like updated to code, the roof, you know, things like that. You know, and then maybe it's just dated, right? Like, but it has flooring. Like, one of the things that, you know, a lot of people don't realize is that if it's just subfloor, that won't meet FHA guidelines. It has to have flooring on top, right? Could be carpet, could be LVP, could be whatever, but it has to have flooring. So if you have a, you know, a couple rooms where they ripped out the flooring, you could still novate it. Just expect that you're probably going to have to either put carpet there or put some sort of flooring there, or you're going to have to offer a concession at closing. And we probably won't have time to get into some cool tactics that we use and strategies that we use for how to not have to pay any money out of your own pocket for renovations when you're doing when you're doing a novation where the lender requires renovations. That's something we do on a regular basis, because how many people in here have $30,000 to do a roof and a septic system on a property that could still fall apart before it closes, right?
Especially when you
Um,
have 5 of these deals a month to 10, right? Yeah, it's a
yeah,
lot of money
exactly.
after a while.
Exactly. So we probably won't have time to talk about that, but we do talk about that in our mastermind, and, you know, Christian will talk more about the mastermind towards the end here. So if you guys want to join that, we'll dive into all of those different things and the strategies that we use so that we don't have to come out of pocket at the closing table. And also, we can leverage those inspection reports to actually make more money on the property. And we have some cool strategies for how we do that as well. But as far as other do's and don'ts, do get the attorney in fact. You definitely want to make sure you have the novation and indemnification agreement signed. These days, you could record a memorandum. The reason we don't record a memorandum anymore is because title companies and closing attorneys will actually close around memorandums of purchase and sale agreement. Ask me how I know. And that's a problem. So you go through all this process to record a memorandum, and then they close with another buyer anyway, even though it's supposed to stop them. So what we do now is we actually record an affidavit of equitable interest, which is, in essence, it's a lien against the property. And that serves two purposes. One, they can't close around that. And two, you don't get any resistance from the lenders. Not you don't get any, but it's very unlikely you're going to get resistance from lenders when it comes to paying out that novation fee. You know, because otherwise you could run into issues where a lender's like, wait, who's this third party that's getting paid for what? Like, it's just
Right.
like an assignment fee. It's weird. Um,
And you front end
so,
all of this contractual work, front end
yep,
it at the beginning
exactly.
when the relationship is just roses and rainbows, right?
Exactly. And we tell people that when we go through the when we review the contract with them, it's like, hey, you know, this section here just states that we're going to notify, put the county of you know, on notice that we're in a contractual agreement and we intend to purchase the property, and so we have interest in the property. So it's all disclosed on the front end, and you want to record that. You don't want to wait until like the very end of the transaction where you think somebody's getting shaky to record it, because title, you know, title might not even see that. that recording could, if they do their final date down, a week or 2 weeks before the closing, and you then record it, they're not even going to see that there's a lien or a memo recorded, right? So you want to do that like right on the front end, so that when they're doing the preliminary title search, boom, 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 there's a big lien here, right?
Yeah. This is kind of a great segue into the next section, which when we talk about the do's and don'ts, we're going to run into, okay, so you've mentioned some do's and don'ts. How does that actually integrate actionably with my analysis before I even get the deal under contract? Or, as I'm looking at it as a cash versus a novation kind of deal, whether I'm wholesaling it. So now we want to talk about that a little bit, unless there was anything else that you wanted to add into the do's and don'ts, Chris, because I think you did a pretty good job covering that.
Yeah, no, nothing. Oh, the other don't of novations is don't do a 30-day close of escrow on your contract with a 15-day inspection period. Do a 60-day close of escrow with a 60-day inspection period.
Right.
And we
So,
talk about it, minimum. We have some that are 120-day close of escrow with 120 business day inspection period, which going through the holiday season is like it's almost a year. So, because you got all the weekends and the holidays and everything. So, but
and by the way,
definitely,
clarity, the only reason why we've done that recently is just because of the market specific conditions. So it made sense and it was feasible. But 60 days is kind of the way to go, and that's part of, you had mentioned that, or at least hinted towards it. So now as we get into kind of the analysis section of it.
oh, and one other thing too, it's 60 business days from the time that buyer receives buyer approved photos. Because how many people in the chat, by a show of the number one, have entered into a contract with somebody and they did a 30-day escrow and it took them 3 weeks to even be able to get access to the property, and now all of a sudden your contract states you have to close in 1 week and you just got in and you couldn't even get any buyers in, right? That's a problem. So our timeline doesn't begin until we receive photos that we've approved of the property.
Right. Yeah, there's been access issues and stuff in the past too. And there's actually a lot more to talk about in terms of all the
Yeah,
specifics that Chris is sharing right now. And I know exactly why he's sharing them. It's exciting. It makes you a lot of money, and it also puts more money in the seller's pocket. And it's a strategy that is going to future-proof your business. So this stuff is like, Chris and I are on the same page. We want to share as much of this information as we can,
yep,
because this will change. I I don't mean to hyperbolize anything, but the landscape of your financial future. If you're wanting to quit your 9 to 5 and you're wanting to get into real estate full time, this is a must in your, as
for
Chris said,
sure.
golf bag. It's called a
How
golf
how
bag.
much time do we have left, Michael?
He's muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Just cover everything you want to cover. We don't need to have a hard stop. Everybody, stay on for as long as you can. Join the Q&A if you can. If you do need to drop for some reason, we will send a replay to everybody who was registered, so you won't have to miss anything.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Awesome.
yeah.
Didn't want to
So
cut anything short or, strip anything out of this.
right, yeah, right. Like to that point, we want to provide as much as we can, and the end of this is going to be just Q&A. So get your questions ready for anything that we've covered and anything that we will hear in a moment, especially around the analysis, because how do we take action on this? How do we even know if a property qualifies for a novation strategy? And that is all about integrating it into your analysis. So Chris touched on one thing, right? Time. If a seller doesn't have the time to be able to, take 60 days, then the strategy might not work, right? Of course, there's ways in which you need to have the conversation to dig into, well, do they really have time or do they not really have time? And that is a little bit of a separate conversation, but just kind of on the surface, 60 days, right, is the timeline. And then can it qualify? Chris mentioned this, right, for FHA. That's kind of a barometer. It's not a hard fact. It's because we can do pre-marketing novations that require basically cash, right, that wouldn't be traditional financing. Because consider it, you've seen fix and flips, investor specials on the MLS, right? So you can still do that, especially if they have the time. So, and we've done that. And then there are others. We'll talk about the analysis piece as well. But Chris, I know there was some more that you wanted to share about how we know whether it qualifies for a novation.
Yeah. So really the key things that we want to look for, the first barometer, so to speak, is it livable? So if you're talking to a seller and they're like, oh yeah, there was a fire 6 months ago and like the back corner of the house is completely, toast, right? Um, or a s'more, so to speak, with all the plastic on the siding melted down like the marshmallow, right? That's probably not gonna make sense as a novation. So the big thing, yeah, certificate of occupancy is something that's going to be required by a lender, right? So it has to be livable. Can somebody now, depending on who you're talking to, everybody has a people in the world have different ideas of what's livable, right? If you go to parts of the Philippines or, other like third world countries, right? Like their view of what's livable compared to what a lender is going to qualify as livable, wildly different, right? So it needs to be livable pursuant to lender standards. It has to be financeable, right? You want something where like the best novation is it's like a dated grandma house. Like picture and imagine the grandpa who, grew up in the Depression, was taught to like pinch every penny. And like if you're buying a car, you want to buy a used car, you want to buy grandpa's car because that guy was out there 2,999 miles. And before it hits 3,000 miles, he's changing the oil, right? He's rotating the tires every single time, right? Like you want that grandpa's house because sure, it might have wood paneling, it might have old shag carpet, old pink tiles in the bathroom, but it's probably got runners and plastic on all the furniture and everything is spick and span. It's immaculate. It just looks like you walked into 1970 when you walked through the front door of the house, right? That's a perfect novation property right there, right?
You see what Michael
Um,
said? Shag carpet is pristine condition, everybody.
exactly. Oh man. Um, so
So
like that's a perfect novation.
so the numbers as that's concerned, right? You're
Hmm.
analyzing your range. If you're wholesaling, okay, what's your MAO? If you analyze it that way, 65% of the ARV in San Diego,
Yeah.
it's 85% of the ARV, and then you're going to come to a number of like what you can purchase it for,
Yeah.
and you kind of ratchet it in between depending on what you want. The way to analyze a novation and the comps that you look at and want to look at are a little bit different, as they should be. So, yeah, Chris is going to draft up his whiteboard here, give us a quick example. As he walks over there and gets his camera ready, I'll share with you just kind of the quick overview. With a novation, you're looking at the active listings. You need to find one's evidence and proof of will this, based on the comps that are active, will this sell? What number will it sell at relatively quickly? And then the math is you want to say that's your list price, multiply that by a rough number of zero point 0.9. So that's going to cover closing costs, fees, realtor commissions, and all that stuff. And then subtract out what your profit is going to be. For us, it's 30K because we know that 30K is kind of the target that we're looking to hit for a novation, right? Versus your cash.
Yep. Can you guys see the board? See what's written on there?
I can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So really we want to look at the difference. This is where everybody that I talk to when I'm coaching people on how to underwrite innovation, this is where everybody gets caught up because, wholesalers specifically, wholesalers and fix and flippers, because it's the same thing, right? It's the same formula, just a wholesaler's just padding in an extra $5,000 to $40,000 of profit for them to make money, right? So the cash MAO formula is all predicated off of ARV, which ARV stands for after repair value. So when it's fully renovated, not over renovated, right? And over renovated would be, like marble tile, like Viking appliances in a market where the median price point home is like $200,000, right? Like you're not going to do that.
Chris, Michael, can
What?
you speaker view? Can you speaker view the whiteboard so that Chris's whiteboard is shown? We have that, so it's kind of small.
Yeah, let me see if I can.
Yeah, I think
You can pin me actually. So if you pin me, then I'll be up on.
right, and then there's speaker view in the upper right hand corner of Zoom that should help with that, as opposed to gallery. You're welcome, Kevin.
Perfect. Is that better? All right. So ARV after repair value. Now, the key thing is, most of you guys probably know this. You don't want to over improve. You want to improve it to the top of that micro market, right? So if you're in Indianapolis, where it's like a $250,000 ARV, you're not putting Viking appliances in, you're not putting, 15-foot long, solid wood planks for flooring that are 6 inches wide, right? You're not doing all of these like really high end, luxury renovations, right? You're doing a renovation for that particular market. So ARV is after repair value. So the general formula, depending on your market, is going to be ARV times, and I'm going to put parentheses here, right? This is not the formula, but this is just the range, right? Could be 0.65 to 0.75. So just depends on the market, right? I'd say the average is going to be 0.75, right? So ARV times 0.75, okay? Then what you're going to do is you're going to, that 25% is going to account for the closing costs, the concessions, buy requests for repairs, and the holding costs, and the flippers profit margin, right? Which in medium price point markets, flippers are going to be targeting somewhere between 15 and 20%. So that's why you'll see could be 70%, could be 75%, right? And then you're going to minus the rehab costs equals flippers purchase price. So this is the price that you could sell it to a flipper for. So if you're the flipper and you're going direct to seller, then this is the formula for you to come up with the number that you could buy the home directly from the seller for. If you're a wholesaler, then you're going to take this minus wholesale assignment fee. And then that's what you're going to make as your cash max allowable offer. Make sense, right? So we've all seen this formula. Again, this percentage can range. If you come into San Diego and you start offering sellers 0.75, you're doing a formula 0.75, basically you would be better off taking hundreds of thousands of dollars, going out back, getting a 50-gallon barrel, lighting all of that money on fire and watching it burn, because you're going to be wasting your time, because the formula for San Diego is going to be, most buyers are doing 0.82 to 0.85%, because we're talking about a medium price point home of like close to $1 million, right? So they don't need the percentage margin because the dollar margin is going to be there. The general rule of thumb for a flipper in San Diego is for every dollar in renovation costs they put in, they want to get $1 return in profit. And it's not going to be 15%. They're lucky if it's 8 to 10% net margin. All right. So know your market, understand where people are buying at. That's your cash formula. The Novation formula it starts at a very different place. The starting point is not ARV. The starting point is the subject property as is comps. So what do I mean by the subject properties as is comps? So if you talk to that grandma and she's like, yeah, if you walk through my front door, it's like you walked into an Austin Powers movie, right? You just walk through a time warp. Everything's great. It's just dated. So you want to find and you want to run comps and pull comps for sold properties that are in like condition, that have the same shag carpet, that have the same pink tile, you know, or close to it, right? Similar condition homes. And what did they sell for, right? This is where you start. What did they sell for? So you take those as is comps, and if you can find multiple, right? If you can find three, take the average of the three and say, okay, you know, one's 210, one's 200, one's 190. Okay, they're averaging out to basically be $200,000. So you take that times 0.9. Okay, why 0.9? I want 90% of that as is sold comp, because when I list the property, generally speaking, I'm going to have realtor commissions, closing costs, concessions, buyer requests for repairs, all that stuff. The national average is 10%. So I want to take, what are they selling for? 10% off to account for my costs to sell it, and then minus $30,000
And by the way, that
equals,
0.9% can range different if you're only investing in one specific market and you know exactly what it is, and you use one title company and one escrow company, and your fees and closing costs are different because you use the same realtor. You can adjust that, but our national, when we do this, is 0.9%. Okay.
but don't adjust it. Just
Yeah.
do 0.9%.
Don't
Because the
adjust.
2% is not going to make or break the deal, right? It's not going to be the difference between the seller signing your contract or not, right? Like on a $100,000 property, 2%, we're talking $2,000. If you can't overcome the objection of $2,000, right? Like, not going to be a big difference, right? Like that's a problem. Plus, if you start doing it there and then you also start adjusting this number, that's where you're going to get yourself, you know, into, you know, some muddy waters, right? So just do 10%, because that's going to factor in closing costs, concessions, buyer requests for repairs, commissions, all that. And then minus 30K, that is your target. That's like your minimum profit you want to make. But here's the thing. There's a lot of times when you underwrite it at those numbers, this will be your MAO novation offer.
Mhm.
Which is a little bit redundant, right? Max allowable offer, novation offer. But that's going to be your MAO for a novation. So you could offer lower, right? So let's say the as is comp is $100,000, right? Times 0.9 is $90,000 minus 30. That would be a 60K offer, right? And that would give you the ability to make $30,000. Now, when you go through the process and the lender does their inspection and their appraisal, and they're like, oh, the roof has to be done, right? Because the roof is 25 years old. Okay, well, that on a 1,200 square foot house, $100,000 price point, you're probably talking about $8,000, right? So you can offer that up. You know, you could pay to have that roof redone. And, you know, if you join the mastermind, we can tell you all the strategies for how we never pay for any of those renovations out of our own pocket, and how you get them done on somebody else's dime and still get it across the finish line and not blow up the deal and not have to ask the seller to pay for it. We'll tell you all about that. But sometimes that's going to have to come out of your margin. So if you start saying, well, I mean, I'd be fine with making 20K, and you know, say, well, I know I could do this for, you know, 0.93. So if I did 0.93, I said, okay, well, I only want to make 20K. And then all of a sudden they come in and they're like, they want a $5,000 credit for closing costs. And then the inspector says, oh yeah, it needs a roof and septic tank. Well, bye-bye $20,000, cancel the deal, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to stick to these numbers. If you can't make it work at these numbers, don't flex too hard off of it. Where I'd be looking at more is, can I find any other as-is comps that could support a slightly higher valuation? Or could I get an agent out there to look at it, and do they know anything more about the market? So that's how you underwrite the actual numbers for innovation. Couple other key things to take into consideration. You want to look at, now what we're doing when we're looking at any properties, whether it's a cash wholesale deal or a novation, is we are looking at active comps. We've paused a lot of our marketing in the state of Florida because every single property that we comp in Florida right now, there are a ton of active comps sitting and sitting and sitting. And what does sitting do to a property, right? Like leads, properties, they're like fish. The longer they sit, the more they stink. The more they stink, the lower they sell for. The lower they sell for, the lower our profit, and the more we cancel, right? So we don't want to deal with that. So Florida is experiencing that a lot. So what we do is we look at active comps to see how many are active, how many are pending, and then we really look at how long, when we're seeing these as-is comps, how long did it take those to go pending, right? If in that scenario where I said we had a 210, a 200, and a 190, if all of them took 4 months to go pending, well, I'm not underwriting at 200. I'm underwriting at 180. Because again, I'm going to do a 60-day contract. Now, if the seller tells me like, oh yeah, I'm fine as long as we could sell it in 6 months, and they're not going to accept a 180 or 175 valuation, then maybe I'll talk to them about doing a longer contract, right? But if I want my numbers to be appropriate, I'm trying to base it off of how long is it taking me to sell and how long is my contract going to be. If everything's taken 4 months, I either need to have 4 months or be lower than everybody else, right? And you'll have to determine that with your seller and figure out, what are they willing to compromise? Are they willing to compromise time, or are they willing to compromise price, and take that into consideration? So put in the chat, like if this is the first time you're seeing this, or there's something, in this explanation that you got a ton of value out of, and you're like, oh man, this is going to help me out a lot, just put a 1 in the chat. And obviously put any additional questions you guys have about the underwriting. Is there anything that, Christian, you think I missed or we should touch on?
I don't think there's anything you really missed. I think the only thing that I was going to bring up, if you hadn't, was the active side, right? As I do a lot of the underwriting on these deals, paying attention to that is paramount. So the subject property as is comps. What if you don't have any as is comps, would be the only other thing, right? What if you can't find as is comps in that market that are selling, but you can find comps that are maybe fixed up but not in the same condition? What do you do
Yeah.
then?
That's a great question. And I would say honestly, and you might know the answer to this because you're looking at them a lot as well. I would say, generally speaking, we've probably found more of the opposite to be true, right? We found, markets like Fort Wayne, Indiana, for example, for whatever reason, no, their fixers, we're not seeing flippers with flipped properties out there, like not a lot of them at least. So when we're underwriting deals, we're having a struggle finding ARV comps, but we're not really having any struggle finding as is comps. But if you can't find an as is comp and everything is a flipped comp, then you really have to use your best judgment. You can go out a little bit, further back in time. We generally start with 90 days, and then we'll go back 6 months. We don't really like going back 12 months because the market was different 12 months ago than it is right now. And that's going to change again here after the election, my guess, and after the new year. So we try not to go too far back, but really it just comes down to a judgment at that point, and start taking things into consideration, right? So like, it depends. If I'm seeing flipped comps, and I'm going to zoom back out so I can actually be talking to you guys,
Your
instead of
cores
just
are
looking
so
at the
clear,
board.
Chris.
Yeah, right. Um, So you have to use your best judgment, right? So like if you're comping and you see ARVs at 300 and the seller, you know, thinks their value is 300 and you're having struggles finding, you know, as is comps, it's like, well, I mean, if you want to CYA, back it out and figure out, okay, well, what's the repair cost to get it up to 300? Figure out what your cash offer for a fix and flip would be. And then you probably have a little bit of room to come up on it. But there's been some markets where the ARV comps and the as is comps are selling for virtually the same, right? And
Yeah.
that creates challenges, right? Um, I would say in those scenarios, your best bet is get the contract locked up, you know, go through the vetting process to vet an agent. I don't recommend flat feeing novations until you really know what you're doing and you are in a position to vet those inquiries, because you know, the great thing about an agent is all of the inquiries, they're going to be vetting them, not you. With a flat fee listing, you're going to have to vet all of those inquiries, go through that whole process, coordinate all the walkthroughs. So as you're new with these, I would not recommend doing flat fees. We've done it from time to time in certain markets where it's super rural and it's hard to get an agent, but it always presents challenges.
Good. So
Um,
I walked you into that question to transition because the kind of the biggest thing that we need to address before we get to just open questions is how are you going to do innovation to take a lot of work off your plate in a market, especially if you've never been in that market before and you're struggling to analyze it, right?
yeah,
Obviously, before the fact, if you don't have an agent selected yet, as we discussed building our team here in that area as concisely as possible, you're going to have to understand some of the answers to that question. And I think you gave good context. That is, make your best estimated guess when it comes to the repairs that it would take. And when there's fully flipped houses selling very closely to the properties that need work, well, I think a novation strategy here is great, but talk to a realtor. So we need to enroll other people who are market experts because we've experienced this before. Fort Wayne is one of them. In the greater Indianapolis, Indiana area, that's definitely true, as well as Florida and other parts of the country like Ohio. So as far as the building your team aspect, that's next on the docket. You asked me, is there anything you missed? I don't think there's anything else. Get your questions ready because after we talk about building your team, I think the next thing is to open up the floor to any Q&A, right?
yep,
So the next thing is enrolling agents in your area to do this. We've accounted for it in our analysis. You guys are confident now in what numbers, the 0.9 minus the 30K, and then looking at the as is comps that are both sold and active, because active is important in this scenario. We want to lean on both. I'm not going to say as a cash wholesale, you're going to lean on a active comp because you're not. We have to go off sold data, and that it's nice to know what our active comps are at, but maybe out of the 5 comps that you choose as a wholesaler, you guys already know this. Maybe you get 1 active comp or 2 active comps and you have a pending and a couple sold or whatever. But when it comes to getting your team and building your team around there, how are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? I would start with the real estate agents. I would start with sold comps and then start calling the agents that listed those properties that are like for like or as close to it
yep.
as possible. Interviewing those agents and asking them, hey, we have a specific script for this, by the way, but the way that you generally have that conversation is just, hey, I got a property, in this area on this street, and I'm looking to get it sold. Tell me a little bit more about this because I'm running into this challenge and this challenge and this challenge. Introduce yourself. You can let them know you're an investor and you want to build a long term, lasting relationship with that agent. And if they don't know, but if they're a great agent, they don't know what a novation is, then you teach them, right? You teach them what a novation
Don't
is. And
say the word novation.
yeah, you don't have to say the word novation. So
Generally speaking, don't use the word novation. It's usually it just creates more questions than it creates answers, you know. So don't say novation. Don't say novation to the seller. You know, it doesn't matter. It'll just create confusion, and confusion kills sales. You know, but to Christian's point, when you're looking at the sold comps, it's like, my goal is I want to sell it in 60 days. Most agents are signing 6-month plus listing agreements, right? So those two things don't line up, right? So when you're looking through your comps, yes, if you can find the highest sold comp, great. But if the highest sold comp took 6 months, that doesn't really help you, right? And it also doesn't show that that agent is a stud at marketing and sales because it took them 6 months to sell it. Now, if all of them take 6 months to sell, then it might not be the agent's fault. But if other properties have sold for a little bit less and they sold in 30 to 60 days, well, those are the agents that I'm reaching out to, and I want to look for speed. It's like, hey, sellers going through personal situation, they've enrolled us to help them out, so I'll be your point of contact. And I just need you to help me understand a little bit more about this market. Here's what we're seeing. We've got questions, can you help me out with this? And get them to do some work, right? Like, you want them to earn the listing, right? And so somebody who doesn't pick up their phone when you call them, somebody who says, oh yeah, I'll get back to you with comps, and that's on a Thursday, and you don't hear from them until Monday or Tuesday when you follow up with them to see like, hey, did you ever get to those comps? Like, that's not a great sign, because what do you think's going to happen when buyers reach out to them or buyers agents reach out to them? Do you think they're going to be on the ball, or are they juggling other properties that are more important to them, right? So you want to test the agents. Just because an agent sounds like they know what they're talking about doesn't mean a thing. I know plenty of people that know nothing but sound like they know a lot, and could easily get the listing, if that's the approach you take.
Right. So, does anybody want kind of a rough outline of a script to share as you're looking for an agent in a market, and also the tasks to give them, in addition to questions to ask them? Put a yes in all caps in the chat, and we'll do it. If not, that's okay.
And we won't give it.
Yeah. Okay, we got yes. We got
Although that
we got,
wasn't in all caps, but it's
yeah,
okay. We'll let it slide, Mehmet.
I'm excited about it. So, all right. Yes, Kevin. All right, cool. All right. And this is coming from Kevin. He's done a Novation before, I believe. Thanks. All right, cool. So here we go. The script as it's outlined, obviously, you don't want to sound like a robot, but in short, you just let the agent know you've got a property that you're looking to sell, but that you're representing the buyer on, and you're looking to work with a great realtor who knows the area really well. And you just ask them, hey, this area pretty well. Do you do listings in this area? And then, what can you tell me about this neighborhood in the market? You ask that question, you get a little bit more information about it. This is going to shed a lot of light, obviously. So you got to share this with them. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Realtor, this situation's pretty unique. So me and the seller, we've been in touch. We actually have a limited power of attorney with the owner of record, and he's going or she's going through a bit of personal situation right now, and they want to sell their house. They're looking to be really hands off with the transaction. I have everything worked out with them. I can provide all the docs to you or your broker or an attorney if you'd like, but I'm really looking to get an agent that can get an offer within 30 days. Okay. You mentioned earlier we need a 60-day to qualify. We want to get this sold as quickly as possible, obviously. Does everybody want to make money sooner, or do they want to push it off, right? So we want to get this sold quickly to gauge the area. So, speaking to the agent, I am looking to move pretty quickly on this. My goal is to get us an accepted offer in less than 30 days, and ideally I'd like to be within a few weeks having it listed. So I'll send you all the information on the condition. I even have some pictures if we end up being a good fit, Mr. and Mrs. Realtor. I have no problem getting you in there to the property to see it, and you can go look at everything. And if the seller's living in there, you can let them know, hey, the seller's living in there right now. If they're not, it's fine. Obviously, we put a lot of properties on lock boxes, so we just give them the lockbox code. It's not like the Century lock boxes with it sends the signal out to the MLS or anything like that. So then you just ask them, what do you typically do when a seller needs to sell really quickly in this area? We're talking about an area you don't already know, and then you want to get their opinion on it. So obviously that's kind of a rough script, and that's what I promised. As far as the tasks to give them, what's going to really educate you as an investor is if you get their expertise in writing. What do I mean by that? Ask them to run comps to get a CMA, right? So that based off of what we would need to list this at to get an offer within 30 days that we would want to accept, right? Based off that price. Some other questions to ask them: do you normally work by yourself or with a team, right? Is there anyone else that I should be in contact with? Because remember, you're calling off of a listing that was sold on Zillow, introducing yourself to this agent for the first time. Also, can you comp this, figure out what the best price would be to get offers within 30 days, and then get specific on the subdivision and is there anything that's up and coming, actively getting listed, pocket listing, stuff like that. So you just want to really dig into those specifics, and really the short of it, for time's sake, is that you want to get all of those questions asked and kind of give them that open overview of who you are. Anything you would add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the key thing is you're not positioning yourself as the seller. You're also not positioning yourself as an agent, right? If they ask, are you an agent? Like, no, actually, I'm not an agent. We have a lot of sellers that reach out to us when they're in difficult situations or tough situations, or they're going through something personal, and they enroll us and hire us to help them with the process. So, we have a limited power of attorney to help them out and everything. But don't be shy. Like, this is the challenge with a lot of newer people, myself included, right? They think that agents know like an infinite amount of things about real estate, and most of them are, quite frankly, not more intelligent than you. Like, that's just the reality. You'll come across some really good agents, but for the most part, like if you've been pouring into yourself, the fact that you guys are even here on this Zoom tells me that you pour into yourself and that you work on educating yourself. That is not the norm when it comes to real estate agents. So, they just kind of casually go through their day and just collect listings and, collect their checks, right? So don't be shy to ask them like, hey, I saw you listed this property. It looks like it took 5 months for it to sell. What do you think was the holdup? And don't plant seeds for them to latch onto, right? Don't be like, what do you think was the holdup? Was the seller just unrealistic? Because the agent's going to naturally be like, well, yeah, because everybody wants to point a finger at somebody else and not take ownership for why something didn't sell. Well, the seller kind of had a number in mind that they really wanted to get to. I really tried to educate them on, why it needed to be lower, but they were really resistant. And so we had to let the market educate them. And so that's what happened. And you could see we did some price reductions, right? Or, well, you know what? There were, at the same time, there were 4 other comps that were like for like. And, one had, a couple had a better lots, they were just slightly better areas. This one backs up against a railroad track, right? So that was kind of a hurdle. You want them to sell you on like you want them to establish their knowledge, right? And their level of education and what they took into consideration, because that's what they're going to do when they're selling your property, right? And ideally, like I'll test agents as well with commission, right? And we're fine with giving 6% commission on the deal because we already factored it into the equation. But we'll start off with like, yeah, this one we're actually approved to do, a 4.5% commission or a 5% commission, right? I want the agent to fight me on that. Why? Because think about it this way, right? There's 2 people in this world, technically 3, but this analogy always stuck with me. A guy, I'm trying to remember his name, David Fabricius. This guy is like Delta Force, like the manliest of men you could pot. Like this guy will kill you in like less than 30 seconds. Like he's been through it all, right? Like top tier, SEAL level, all that, right? And he said, there's 2 types of people in this world. There's wolves and there's sheep. But then there's sheepdogs. Sheepdogs have all the tools and weapons that a wolf has, but they use them for a good cause, right? And so why do I say that is because when your agent listing your property is sitting across the table from a wolf who is trying to get your property at the lowest price they possibly can for their buyer. You don't want a sheep there who's going to be dinner. You want a sheep dog who has all the weapons that that wolf has and can fight that wolf off and negotiate that up and work on your behalf to get the highest price that they possibly can.
Given the David Fabricius reference, man. I went through a boot
Bro,
camp with him, by the way.
yeah, he's a G.
Yeah, African Special Forces. He is
Yeah.
pretty dope. But yeah, you're absolutely right, man. That's some good input and insight in this. Does anybody, because here shortly, I mean, we can address this topic even more, but now, I'd love to open it up to questions, and we'll dive into whatever you have, and it's what you make it. So walking away from this, we promised a few things, and in those promises that were made, it was, you're gonna feel at least confident enough to know like what a novation is, an overview of how to do a novation. Do you guys feel like you have those questions answered?
Put a fire emoji in the chat if you feel like, man, this was a legit training. I got stuff that I could actually take and go implement.
And
Because when
guys, while
you
we're waiting for that feedback and also for questions to start populating anything that we want to these guys want to cover in the Q&A, I wanted to do a quick follow up on what you were just saying about curating those agent relationships. Launch control can be a really great way to help you curate those relationships, is when you reach out to agents in your market, and it can be a very simple introductory text message, something along the lines of, I've got a property that I think might fit your portfolio in the Oak Grove area. Do you have room for it? Question mark. Right. And when they reply and they get into the inbox, it's going to open up all the features. And then from there, you can go through a quick text vetting process to kind of see if they are that subject matter expert that you need, if they aren't just somebody who, got their real estate license 6 months ago and haven't done anything with it, right? Like Chris was saying, like that sheepdog that you're looking for. You can ask a couple of those vetting questions via text. Of course, you're eventually going to push to a call. Of course, you're eventually going to create that relationship. But getting them into the inbox does two things for you when you're creating these curated relationships with agents. One, their text is always a quick response mechanism. So there are always going to be things in the process of a deal where you just need a number, you need a timeline, you need a yes, and text is going to be faster than a call to get that. So if you've got an open line to them, it's great for that. But also, if you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket or put all of your focus on one sheepdog, right? So if you've got 2 or 3 agents in any given market that have that expertise towards novations, you can use the drip automation function to give them what feels like exclusive rights to a property that you have available. And then you can run through what they come back with to find the best possible deal and the best possible fit for that particular property, while still making them feel like they have that exclusive one-on-one pipeline with you and your business.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's a great tip there. Using launch control to text message, right? Automating the process of getting in front of as many agents as possible. And guys, you don't only have to use agents for novations, right? This is the thing that grinds my gears with wholesalers that, are like, oh, I can't get these cash deals, can't get these cash deals. I was like, cool, how many agent referrals have you given? Like, why would I give an agent referral? Like, well, because I just got a check for $15,000 from an agent that I referred a deal to, right? And that wasn't a novation. It wasn't a cash deal. It was a referred listing, right? And here in San Diego, it was like a $1.3 million listing, and I negotiated a 35% referral fee from that agent. So when she's getting 3% on a $1.3 million house, right? $39,000 for 3%. She gives 20% to her brokerage. So she's clearing 80% of that. And then I get 35%. Boom, 10 G's. That's bigger than some people's wholesale deals, right? So you can leverage launch control to text agents, and you could even, I love this way to approach an agent. It's like, hey, I saw you were a listing agent on a property here in San Diego not too long ago. Just curious, are you taking more listings right now, or are you too busy? That question, 1,000% of the time, unless you're talking to a top freaking 0.01% agent who is legitimately too busy, you will never get the response. No, I'm too busy to take more money. No, no way. I don't give me money, right? Um, and you can send your wholesale deals to them because most agents have networks and relationships with investors who are flipping properties as well. And so, hey, do you work with any investors? Do you have any flippers, right? You can get them to bring the deal out and, get your deal across the finish line.
That's huge,
And
man. As far as
usually, yeah, sorry, one last thing. Usually the investors that work with agents on a regular basis, a lot of those are, the one-off investors that do a couple deals a year, who have a smaller team, they have smaller margins, they're doing the work themselves a lot of times, right? So they can afford to pay more for it because they already do, because they buy through agents on market, right? So you can tend to get larger assignment fees and things like that, and buyers that aren't in the other spots like Investor Lift and things like that. Contrary to popular belief, Investor Lift doesn't have every single buyer in the market on their platform, right?
yeah, as far as
Great platform. We use it.
as far hold on now. As far as referral fees, when you're doing a listing referral, you have to be a licensee, a licensed agent yourself, or someone on your team has to be a licensed agent. Unless it's just a one-off where you structure outside of their brokerage, which I'm not recommending, by the way, because I'm not trying to subvert brokers. But I'm just saying I've done that before as I was actively getting my license. So, that's just one thing to take note of. But yes, you can still build good lender relationship, or sorry, good realtor relationships, and they can give you access to their buyer pool and give them a little kickback for just introducing you to a buyer as a normal person. But it's up to their discretion as to whether or not they want to be able to accept that. Just build the relationships, start building relationships with agents, and absolutely can use launch control to do that. In fact, I can't message everybody in the chat, but I can ask Michael to drop a link specifically that is with Real Estate Investing Made Easy to Launch Control if you haven't yet signed up, because we've been using it for, oh my goodness, how many years now have we been using Launch Control? Just,
6 years probably
You
since
can
I've been
message the
here.
chat. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, it's been a long time.
since
So,
2019.
yep, yep. So that's it. Yep, that's the SMS marketing, which we've tried others before too, and I'm telling you that we're not going anywhere. So this is the one to use. So we do have one question here. Speaking of team, uh, Mehmet said, "How many people will be in my team, realtor or others?" The answer is it depends. It's up to you, man. I would try my best to, you know, build those relationships. Not everybody's going to be a good fit. We have an agent, two agents actually in San Diego that we love. We've known for a while. One of them was an internal agent that was on our team for a really long time. Super successful. Didn't need us, but we're still doing business with her. So every time we bring something to her, we know that it's going to get sold. We know that it's going to be top dollar. We know that she knows her market very, very well. So actually, both really rock star realtors in San Diego. One specifically in Indianapolis, Indiana, who will work all over Indianapolis, who is an absolute rock star. None of those relationships happened by accident. They were intentional. Okay.
Mhm.
So intentionally start building your team depending on how many markets you're in, Mehmet. You want at least one rock star agent, right? You could have more, especially in big counties like San Diego, which there's like North County, East County, South County, Central San Diego. Huge, huge opportunities, and then build them, build a team. Just continue
Here's
to
a really big benefit about novations that's different than cash wholesales, right? Cash wholesales, you Could you find the same buyer for multiple of your properties? Yeah, absolutely, right? Like it certainly happens from time to time. But generally speaking, buyers have different buy boxes, right? And you're going to find different properties and things like that. The great thing about Novations is when you find a good agent, stick with that agent and you could just keep feeding them and feeding them and feeding them and feeding them and feeding them. Um, Old reference to the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers intro. A couple people might get that, but uh, anyway,
Billy.
just keep feeding them these deals to list. And now what you've done is you've shortened your time, right? So now your dispo side of things, you've already done the front end work, just hand it off to the same agent that knocked it out of the park for you the last time, right? And keep feeding them deals. And you want an agent that is a problem solver, right? Like our agent in Indianapolis, she's constantly trying to solve problems and coming up with creative ways to solve problems. You want that on your team. Other than that, the transaction coordination side of things, it's not like a creative deal. I mean, it's sort of creative, but you don't need, once you figure out how to do it, you don't really need a ton of like different tools in your belt for that. I would suggest for those of you who are just getting into Novations, join the mastermind, JV with us, because we can do a lot of that work for you, the transaction coordination side of things, make sure that the lien gets recorded properly, make sure that you actually get paid and that you don't just get cut out by the title company, which has happened to us in the past. So we can make sure that you don't run into those problems and coach you and teach you along the way so that you can then do it on your own and you don't have to rely on anybody else. So yeah, I guess apparently that message does only go to the host and the panelists. Christian, I didn't realize that
Oh.
that was the case. So,
That's okay. Yeah.
but
So the question was how many people on the team. That's going to be dependent upon your volume, where your market is, but you're going to need the traditional team members as well. You need buyers, you need a good title company, escrow company, attorney, depending on your state, and you need, it could just be you cold calling or whatever, and text message marketing with
yep.
launch control. So, you know,
And
that's
there's a
going
process for vetting title companies as well that we didn't touch on, but we do in the mastermind, and we can help you through that process as well.
Yeah. So that's all about novations, everybody. What we promised was that we'll give you a simple
There
analysis.
there was a couple other questions in the chat, by the way.
Oh, in the
Not
chat,
not
not
in
the
the
question.
yeah, in the chat. Yeah, so we'll just run through those real quick. Some of them are fairly basic. So can you use it for land deals? Sure, you could use it for land deals, but generally speaking, land deals are coming with some sort of private capital, hard money type of thing. They're not coming with lender contingent offers. So I don't think it's really necessary, so to speak. Because you can just assign those deals. But it can't hurt to have a novation indemnification agreement. I would say the attorney in fact would certainly be helpful in giving the ability to list the property on the MLS because that'll open up and get more eyes on it. Let's see here.
I got a quick question, guys, related to land.
Yeah.
So, land purchases or the land acquisition process is typically in rural markets, and you said are always in rural markets. And you guys said that Novations could expand your market into more rural areas. So my question is, how rural is rural? If somebody is out doing land acquisition, is there a potential to monetize otherwise, untouchable markets out there by just focusing on land plus novations?
Well, if you're talking about novations for single family homes in those
Yeah, exactly.
markets,
That's what I'm saying. Like they're doing land, but there are
yeah.
like some small little towns scattered about in that
Yep.
market. Is there a chance to maybe activate some monetization through innovation process where wholesaling isn't typically going to work in that small of a market?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because you're taking it out to the retail market, and the retail market still finds cash buyers, right? Like there's still a lot of deals that get done in San Diego, even in San Diego, major city like San Diego, where a lot of cash fix and flips get done and bought on the MLS, right? And there's businesses that have built their entire strategy off of on market marketing, just marketing simply to on market properties to then wholesale those. So yeah, I would absolutely say novations can be really helpful in those rural markets. The key thing rural markets, not always, but a lot of times, rural markets generally mean more days on market. And so you have to take that into consideration when you're doing your underwriting. And again, there's three levers, but generally speaking, two levers that sellers can pull when it comes to on market, right? If you want to move a property, you can either wait longer until somebody's willing to come to the price that you have it at, or you can reduce the price. The third thing is you can renovate it, but if they were going to renovate it, they would have done that. And so they're talking to you because they're not going to renovate it, right? So really those are the two levers. So you have to work with the seller and figure out what is the most important thing to them. Is it speed or is it a price? If it's a specific price and it's a higher price, they have to be willing to sacrifice speed in order to accomplish that goal. And so you might need to get into a longer agreement period so you can properly novate it. But if they're willing to flex on the price, you could do a 60-day close of escrow. You just need to make sure that you're able to list it for a sizable chunk lower than the as-is comps that have sold in that market.
Yeah.
Right.
Kevin did ask earlier, what is the other supplemental contract in addition to indemnification to sell to a buyer using a loan in order to list it on the MLS? And that was the power of attorney, the attorney in fact, the limited power of attorney document.
Yeah, that doesn't, and just to clarify, just because of the way that your question was phrased, the attorney in fact doesn't change your ability to sell it to a buyer using a loan. The attorney in fact is a limited power of attorney that gives you the powers to sign listing documents and offers on behalf of the seller so that you can facilitate the process. Now, you don't have to have that to sign documents. As a matter of fact, if a property is owned by a trust or owned by an entity, you won't be able to get a power of attorney, right? Because a trust, or let's say somebody has power of attorney for somebody else, you can't give power of attorney from a power of attorney, right? So you might need to enroll that power of attorney to sign listing documents and sign offers, because you can't get the power of attorney or the AIF. I'd still suggest getting it signed anyway and just try to push it through and figure out what you can do. But basically, the AIF just simply gives you the ability to sign listing documents and offers on behalf of the seller. The Novation indemnification agreement is what gives you the ability to novate it and bring in a buyer. You're effectively canceling the cash purchase agreement to replace it with a lender contingent agreement. And then another thing that we didn't talk about is a disbursement ledger, which we talk about a lot about in the mastermind. We put together a full disbursement ledger when we're working with title and escrow, where we get a preliminary settlement statement, and then we update our disbursement ledger to send it back to them so they know exactly how everybody's getting paid out and there's no questions. And that is probably one of the most important steps to make sure you actually get paid and you don't get cut out. Whereas a cash assignment is very easy. A lot of title companies do it. You could literally never even speak to them after sending them over contracts and pretty much guarantee you're going to get your assignment fee. But novation fees is very easy to get cut out of the deal if you don't properly vet those.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. And what a gem for for the very ending of this webinar. The other question I saw was, can we cover EMD during due diligence with Novation?
Yeah, you just put EMD in the same way you would with any other contract. I mean, we only do $100 EMD. Whatever your EMD amount is, you just put that in with title and escrow, and then you'll get it back at the end.
Yep. And then Kevin says, yes, I did that in further dialogue. I appreciate for the clarification. I referred to, okay, got it. All right, cool.
Jerron Hopkins missed the formula. Can you share the buy price formula once more? Yeah, very simply, buy price formula is you find as is comps, take the average of those as is comps, assuming they sold in less than 60 days, then you can take that. If they take longer, then you want to take a little bit off of that number, times it by 0.9, so 90% of the as is comps, and then minus $30,000, and that'll give you your max allowable novation offer. your Mano, actually.
Yeah, so I was just typing this out, but just a reminder, we're going to send the full replay to everybody on the call today. So if you missed a chance to
Perfect.
screenshot something, you'll still have that chance to screenshot.
Perfect. Perfect. I think that's the last question there.
Yep, that's the last one. Awesome, man. I appreciate everybody tuning in and also watching the replay. You can check us out at reime.us if you want to learn more about that mastermind. And as far as our YouTube channel, Real Estate Investing Made Easy, because, it's time to make it easy. That's kind of what we do. Hoping that you guys will keep in touch and we could do some deals together too.
What was the special promo that we had for them?
Oh, yeah. I totally forgot. I'm glad you. Yeah. So normally our mastermind is $497 a month actually for our mastermind students, but we're doing $197 for anybody in the launch control community. Anybody who is a launch control member.
Is there a promo code for that?
Yeah, there is. It's actually LC REI 2024.
Perfect.
Totally forgot about all that.
Awesome. Yes, guys. And that gives you access.
LC REI 2024.
Yeah.
Yep. That is it. So, yeah, so that gives you access. We meet every Wednesday, and then we also have an office hours every Friday.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, Christian, Chris, I can't thank you guys enough. That was amazing. For everybody that stuck around for the long haul, thank you so much. Thank you for the questions. I think this was a really great session. Again, we'll send the replay, and we got a few links in if you want to quickly grab them for the promo code that they've got, the reime.us or REI Made Easy website. And then I popped a quick one in for our new community on Facebook, if anybody wants to join that as well, where we post replays from events like this one and connect you with people like Christian and Chris to really help you scale your business. So again, thanks to y'all. Thanks for everyone that attended. Really great session today.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
All right. Bye, guys.